Series. Welcome back to the Pro Football Hall of Fame for the latest installment in our Before the Snap series. If you're a return viewer, thank you so much for joining us once again. And if this is your first time ever viewing, we thank you for taking some time out of your day to join in on this program. I hope you'll see by the end of this program all of the great insight that our special guest has. Whether you're a student, you're a teacher, a young professional, or a seasoned vet, we believe there's something for you in the Before the Snap program. My name is Nathan Martin, and I work as a youth and education coordinator here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I'll be moderating the session for you today with our special guest, Miss Caroline Deisley. Now, before we get started, I have a couple of reminders and thank yous that I want to get through, and then we'll get to the great content that is our program. First, I want to thank Caroline for taking time out of her day to join us for this program. It should be a fun conversation with some questions coming from the guests, from us here at the Hall of Fame, and we really appreciate you for all that you do for the game and the Denver Broncos. Next, I want to thank you guys, our viewers. Without you guys, the program wouldn't be what it really could be. We really rely on the questions that you guys bring, and we want you guys to be involved as much as possible. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join us and view this program. Now, those reminders. Here at the Hall of Fame, our mission is to honor the heroes of the game, to preserve its history, to promote its values, and to celebrate excellence everywhere. And I believe personally that we accomplish that mission in several different ways throughout this program, and I hope that you guys will see that as well. And then the last reminder is for everybody that's viewing and watching live on Facebook with us. Like it, share it, comment, send in your questions. Let us know where you're a student at, where you work at. We want to hear from you and see that you're engaging with us in this program, because it really makes it that much better of a program when you guys are involved. So let's get to the star of the show. This is enough from me. It's enough with this introduction. Today, we're lucky and grateful to be joined by Caroline Deisley. Caroline is the social media engagement manager for the Denver Broncos. She worked with the Broncos for the last 5 seasons, beginning as digital media intern in June of 2016. After being hired on full-time in the spring of 2017, Caroline has been the sole manager of the Broncos' social media accounts since the start of the 2017 season. While a majority of her responsibilities and interests lie in the day-to-day posting and creating content for the 8.1 million followers across the Broncos' social media platforms, her role has expanded to include developing the team's social media strategy, reporting and analyzing performance data on a regular basis, and collaborating with other internal departments, including sponsorship and community development. With that, I'm honored to welcome our special guest, Caroline Deisley. Caroline, thank you for connecting with us for Before the Snap.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And let's go ahead and get started with the first question. What does the social media engagement manager do? What does that job title mean?
It's kind of all encompassing. I manage all of the Broncos social media accounts. So in terms of my day-to-day responsibilities, a lot of it is posting across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, now TikTok. You're trying to keep up with all the different social media platforms, but it's really grown into also a lot of the behind the scenes work of content ideation, working with other departments to get the content that we produce on a daily basis sold, and then reporting all of our metrics to internal stakeholders.
So that sounds like a lot. Definitely sounds like a lot. And let's backtrack, because we know what you do now. You just told us, but growing up, social media wasn't really what it is today. So what did you want to be when you were growing up? You're in high school and then getting into college. How did you get to where you got?
I think I always knew that I wanted to work in sports. The hardest part was figuring out what that job was. I remember in high school, I had to do a Spanish project where we were on camera and did a fake newscast, and my dad watched it and was like, wow, you're really good on camera. And so I decided, okay, I will be a sports reporter. So I worked on the newspaper and in yearbook in high school, where I first got a little bit of experience in journalism. And then I went to USC, the University of Southern California, and was in the Annenberg School of Journalism there. And that was where I really was developing my passion for broadcast journalism, working as a reporter for the newscast. And I was also the executive producer, but I kind of stumbled into a job with the USC athletic department, and that was running social media. And I was really lucky because my boss at the time gave the reins to a sophomore and junior in college and really got to learn while I was going. And like you mentioned, social media was really kind of first becoming what it is now today. And so it was great to get that hands-on experience when we were all just trying to figure everything out.
That's really cool. As you let us know that your dad was your first fan. You know, he would have been the first person that would have given you the retweet, the share. And it's important to have that family support. And you mentioned going to USC, and we do our best here at the Hall before these programs to research our guests. You know, sometimes these guests, you know, are unknown to the public. So we do our best to get on Google, Twitter, Instagram, whatever we can find. And in that research, you mentioned USC, and I found somewhere the first post-game interview you did actually was with future first-round draft pick Leonard Williams. So what do you remember from that experience? He plays for the Giants now, but what do you remember from that experience and kind of that whole USC experience and how it's helped you in what you do today with the Broncos?
I remember being really nervous. You kind of never know, especially when you're interviewing someone, you don't know how to approach them when you haven't done it before or what the protocol is or how to do it. But I arranged it with our SID, and I remember holding up my recorder, making sure that I was actually recording so that I could save it later. And he had just finished a game. So all I remember about that interview was he was dripping sweat on me the entire time because he had just come off the field and my arm was just covered in sweat. And I was like, wow, this is really a luxurious career that I've decided to chase.
That's
But
funny.
it was great too, just because I think that everyone at USC was so patient with the student journalists. And I remember Clay Helton, who's now the head coach, was just the offensive coordinator. And I was trying to interview him, but had missed him walking by. And he was already with his family and celebrating after the win. And he stopped and came back and still did the interview with me while he was holding his kids. And so I just have always really appreciated him for that humble generosity that he showed to a sophomore in college.
Yeah, that's really cool experience. And you know, the people you work with made that experience even better. You know, that you, like you mentioned, the student athletes and even the coaches at USC kind of just being an open book and being willing to work with you as a student is really, really cool. So we got our first question coming in from Facebook, and it's kind of going to shift the conversation a little bit, but it says, you know, with the emergence of platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, how has your job changed in the day in, day out as social media continues to change? Because it used to be like MySpace and Facebook and, you know, and then Twitter comes along. So it keeps changing and evolving. So how does that change for you in the Broncos?
I think it kind of makes my job a little bit more exciting in that you kind of figured out the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world. And sure, they're going to introduce new features or a new algorithm that might change your strategy. But these new platforms at least give you some more creative flexibility. It's, hey, what can we do on TikTok today that's going to go viral? Or what's an idea that we have that we can just try out? And so since it's kind of this new territory, I feel like we have more creative freedom in terms of figuring out what content works on that platform. So it's a nice kind of trial and error period while we try and figure out a strategy for it.
Yeah, that's really good. And then actually, I want to go to another question because it kind of combines with one that I have. And I always have to, you know, I point this way because that's where I have Facebook set up so I can see the questions come in. I'm not just randomly looking at the wall. But, you know, I had a question, and it was kind of related to, you know, for a student in high school that's going to be entering their college career, maybe they're a freshman, they're right at the beginning of their college career. What kind of advice would you give them to end up in a career field that they're going to be passionate about? And then maybe go another step. If they're interested in social media, if they're interested in sports reporting, what kind of advice would you give that individual? So maybe kind of twofold, if you can answer both those.
Definitely. I think it's really important to try a lot of different aspects of the sports industry out to figure out what it is that you really want to do. Like I mentioned, I wanted to be a sports reporter. And while I was doing that in college, I realized that it wasn't necessarily the thing that I was most passionate about and wanted to do on a daily basis. And so you don't necessarily know that until you try. And I know it can be hard in high school in terms of the opportunities to break in, but see if you can shadow somebody for a day and see what they do. And that way you get a little bit more perspective of what opportunities are out there. Because when I was going to college, I didn't think that it was possible to have a career in social media. And so I didn't even know that the job existed. And so it's really was a great thing for me to discover while I was trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And then I would also say that it's never too late to change. It's not related to sports, but I had several friends in college who even changed their major their senior year and ended up getting a minor and going to post-grad school so that way they could go into a different career path. And so never be afraid to, if this is something you really want to do, it's not too late to turn it around and really figure out a way to break in.
That's really, really great advice. And I felt like you were like very encouraging with that. So thank you for that for myself and hopefully all of our viewers as well. We'll keep going to Facebook because they're doing a great job providing questions, and I don't need to ask questions if they keep giving us good stuff. So it says, how do you go about getting an internship with a professional team? And then maybe add on to that, for those of you that don't know, you started as an intern with the Denver Broncos. So what was that experience like? And then maybe how did you go about getting that opportunity in that position?
I think some more advice that I would share is don't be afraid of an internship. I was kind of struggling as I was graduating college because I had so many friends who had had a job lined up since the end of their summer internship after their junior year. And that's not the way that journalism or sports works. And so I was getting pretty stressed out towards the end of my senior year, figuring out what I was going to do once I graduated. And I felt like I had worked so hard in college and taken advantage of all of these great opportunities. And I was like, the best I can get is an internship, and like was a little down on myself, but it truly was a full-time job. And so just because it was only going to be temporary, or so I thought, for a year, I really was a valuable member of the team and was trusted to do the work. And so it wasn't running coffee. It was, you're interviewing players, you're posting articles to the website, you're taking photos at a community event. And so my first piece of advice is just to not be afraid of the label internship, especially if you see it in the NFL or any of the other professional sports industries. And it really does give you the experience that you need to get your foot in the door, because I was lucky enough that they happened to be expanding our department at the time. So I was hired on full time after my internship, but that's not usually the case. However, if you were an intern for the Broncos, then maybe there's a full-time position open with the Chargers, and we're going to recommend you to the Chargers. And so I think that it's a really good way to get your foot in the door. And we have a full-time staff member that we just hired who was an intern for the Lions last year. So it really does go to show that it's just a way to get your foot in the door, and you learn how a different organization approaches social media or whatever role that you may have.
Yeah, that's really good. And you mentioned how after that internship, if you do a good job, which hopefully you would as a student, you'd be working really hard. The organization would likely recommend you to another organization if there's an opening in that field. And that kind of, to me, kind of just screams networking. And I don't know about you, but when I was in college, that's what they screamed at us. Network. You got to go meet people. You got to go, send those awkward emails and LinkedIn requests and things like that. So what advice would you give to somebody who's in college or maybe just starting their career out on just networking in the broad sense? What advice would you have on that?
I think it's really important, especially within the sports industry that is pretty hard to break into. The more people that you can connect with and have meaningful conversations with is only going to help you when you're applying for jobs in the future. I think a key note that's important to stress that I probably didn't follow myself is look at the schedule. If you're applying for a job with the Broncos, don't email them on a game day. If you're, I've had people email me on the first day of the draft, and it's maybe that's what reminded you to reach out to them. But I think be cognizant of what could be going on in that person's work day, and then figure out a good way to approach it. I also think it's important a lot of times it's just like, hey, do you have a job? Do you have a job? And like I mentioned, I know the stress and how hard it is. I just would express that I think it's important to come with meaningful questions and not just be asking for a job, because we might not have anything that we can offer, and that's going to be a really short conversation, and I'm not going to probably remember that person. But if you can ask for advice on something, if you can ask a question of like, hey, I saw this post on your Instagram, how did you guys do that, and really show that you're learning the industry and what's going on, I think shows a lot of value.
So you're basically saying if someone sent you an email after this program and said, "Hey, I watched you on Before the Snap with the Hall of Fame and had some more questions," that would be more meaningful than saying, "Caroline, do you have a job? Can you hire me?"
Exactly. And I'd be happy to answer any of those emails. And I think it's important too, if I have a lot of students who are working on projects for school and they're supposed to interview a professional. And if you have the questions ready, if you can email them or send them, I will probably put more thought into that than if we set up a 30-minute phone call just based on my day. And so it's a little counterintuitive to the journalist in me where you're not supposed to email your questions in case you have a follow-up. But just because of how busy we can get, I think that when I sit down and have the time to really reply to something, I'll put more thought in it than if I just answer a phone call on a whim and only have 20 minutes to really express myself.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice. I want to kind of transition to another aspect of the conversation I was hoping to have with you this afternoon, and it's related to what you do with the Broncos, on a day-to-day basis. You kind of already told us what your job is and a little bit kind of what your day-to-day is, and maybe you can go into that in greater detail, what the day-to-day job looks like. But I also want to ask, what's the most like meaningful event that you get to cover? Because working in social media with a professional sports franchise, we think game days, we think, things like that, but there's so much else that goes on and gets covered. So is there something that's really meaningful to you? And then maybe you can also touch on what your day-to-day schedule looks like.
Yeah, I'll answer the meaningful part first. I think what's really stood out to me since working for a professional team is just the quality of guys that we have in the NFL and being able to go to a community event and there's less pressure at those events because you're not at practice or in a game week and really focusing on winning on that Sunday. And so getting to see the impact that these guys can have in the community is just so special. And it's been an honor to work with them and see the stance that they've taken this last year and how they're using their platform for the greater good is just an honor to be a part of. And I could go on and on about that because I and really have been touched by some of the players that are in our locker room. That is not something that you necessarily was an expectation for me going into the job. And then in terms of my day to day, I can run you guys through. Today we have a Saturday game, so it's a little weird. This is technically our football Saturday. So we have a lot of like a 24-hour graphic that will go at 2:30. We have the hype video that we're going to put out. So it's a lot of content that we're working on scheduling to get fans excited for the game. So most of my day consists of taking that content and coming up with copy and scheduling it throughout the day on all our different platforms. And then getting ready for tomorrow in case we have any ideas for something special to do if we win, and really highlighting the fact that we're on a nationally televised game tomorrow and Saturday.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear, the day-to-day aspect. And then also just the heart that you were talking about, how great some of those players are and the way they use their platform. It's awesome to see that. Working at the Hall of Fame, we see that sometimes with our gold jackets. Really a lot of the gold jackets, and you probably would echo that. A lot of the players really are just great individuals, and they want to see a positive impact made and a difference made in the communities that they're a part of. This next question, though, related to your job. So how do you make the Denver Broncos social media stand out from the other 31 NFL franchises? And then you could even expand into the other pro leagues. Like how do the Denver Broncos stand out from the other franchises?
I think it's a great question and one that we're trying to answer every day as a social group. And that there's so much noise on social media is the buzzword that people will share in the industry. And it's hard to break through that clutter sometimes and really stand out. And so I think something that we've tried to do, especially this last year, is lean into everything that's happening. It hasn't been the season that we necessarily wanted, but we've had so many injuries. And just at the beginning of the year, we lost Von Miller and Cortland Sutton in a span of 2 weeks, like our two best players. And so we tweeted like 2020, can you not? And like it blew up. And it was just a way for us of like, hey, let's accept this. Let's accept the kind of fate that we've been given and really lean into what our fans are feeling. I think that that's key, is to really read the room and kind of know the tone. What can be tough with that is when you're not having a winning season and you work for an organization like the Broncos, it's how do we lean into this without lowering our standards or coming off as something that's embarrassing for our franchise? And so that's been a really fine line that we've been trying to walk. And it's, hey, let's lean into the successes that we have, and let's lean into some of the moments where we're like, we really can't believe that this is happening to us. Like, we didn't have a quarterback to play with. And so it's okay, let's really dive into Kendall Hendon's story. And this is going to be something that's talked about for years to come. You never get the opportunity to work a game like this. And so we really dove into it and figured out how can we make the most out of the situation.
Yeah, that's really good, and really good insight. So another question, and I'm actually not going to ask it because I'm going to send it to our museum. Live in our museum, we have Kara Kwasinski from our team, and she's standing in front of one of our Denver Broncos artifacts, and she's got a question for you, kind of, I think, related to the planning process that you may have working in social media. So, Kara, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Nate. Can you hear me?
Go for it. Yeah, we can hear you. Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you. And welcome everyone to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, or Pro Football Today Gallery. My apologies. As Nate said, my name is Kara Kwasinski, and I'm the senior video producer and chief audio engineer here at the Hall. And today I'm here in front of the jersey that quarterback Peyton Manning was wearing when he broke the record held by Brett Favre for most career touchdown passes on Sunday Night Football against the 49ers on October 19th, 2014. After the game, he held up this piece of paper with the number 509 on it to pay homage to the iconic Wilt Chamberlain after he scored 100 points in a single NBA game with the Philadelphia Warriors. Standing in front of a Peyton Manning Broncos artifact has me wondering, have you guys planned anything on the social media side of things to promote his likely selection into the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
Definitely. I think we're all really excited and hopeful that Peyton gets in this year and his career speaks for itself. So come January, we've already been discussing what can we do to really capitalize this and honor someone who is such a great ambassador for the sport and for the Broncos as well.
Awesome. Well, Kara, thanks for doing that for us. And it's cool to hear you guys are thinking ahead, because I know our team in social, they're thinking of ways that, they can be prepared for the likely enshrinement and selection of Peyton Manning. We always joke here at the Hall as staff, we don't vote. So, don't complain to us if your favorite player doesn't get in. But, it is probably likely that Peyton will get in. And he had a great way to finish his career with you guys in the as a Denver Bronco. We got another question from Facebook, though, I wanted to get to, and it's still related to what you're doing, day to day. And it says, working for an NFL team in the social area, what are some of the challenges you and your team face with not sharing too much, I guess, of the team's business, the behind the scenes? Like, there's that fine line. You talked about a fine line earlier. Like, we want fans to have this access, but we also can't let people see this.
Exactly. And it's tough because I think a lot of fans want it, or you have them mic'd up and they want to see more of those moments. And it's tough. We work really closely with football to make sure that we're not showing anything that we don't want to, because ultimately it could become a competitive advantage, and we don't want to do that. So we try to show as much as we can and really work with the players too, because we're representing them as well and want to put them in the best light. And so it's just working with internal stakeholders like football to make sure that we're not showing too much, but also trying to share as much as we can with our fan base, especially in a year like this when we haven't been able to have full capacity and really have fans at the stadium, because we're used to having fans at training camp and we couldn't have them this year. So we had a show hosted by Hall of Famer Steve Atwater. I love getting to say that. We're very excited for him to go in with Peyton next year. But he hosted a show and had different legends like Peyton join one day. And there were times when Steve was like, okay, we can't show you the play that's being running, but I'm going to break it down and let you know like what I'm seeing in a way. And so it was really cool to see how we were able to provide fans that access who usually get to come to training camp in a world like this when they weren't able to.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I love the example talking about training camp with Hall of Famer Steve Atwater and likely Hall of Famer, class of 21, Peyton Manning even joining the one day. We got another question from Facebook, and this is from Allie. She's a freshman at Syracuse, so all the way over in New York. And she says, the negative, the so many people look at, I'm going to kind of paraphrase her question. So many people look at the pandemic and COVID-19 as such a negative thing, but what are some of the positives that you've seen? Maybe it's changed your job, or, ways that you're trying to see a positive light through this working in social media.
I think it's been an interesting challenge just because we've had to really reevaluate how can we deliver that behind the scenes content like I was mentioning. And so it was a way for us to really put the fans first, which I think is always a goal of ours. But when you get to have fans in the stadium or at training camp, you might take some things for granted. Whereas this year we knew that no fans had access to anything. So it was like this moment that we're so used to seeing really might be something that works on social because the fans aren't able to. And then from a personal or professional standpoint, I'm at home right now. I've worked at home a lot and figured that out. And it wasn't too much of an adjustment for me because I work at home on Saturdays or days that I'm not in the office all the time. And so it wasn't, but I also want to commend our team because we didn't drop the ball whatsoever in terms of our communication. And so I think as you look at the future, we work a ton of hours in sports and it's a grind, and it really can be taxing at times. But if you can work from home more often or find ways to figure out more of that work-life balance, I think the pandemic has shown that we're capable of still getting the job done.
Yeah, that's true. We got another question from Facebook, and this is from a college senior, Jaron, I think is how I'd say, Jaron Moreland. And he said, how would you advise a college senior to make their, resume, their application, cover letter stand out from the rest? What would you advise? What do you like to see when you're looking at potential interns or entry-level positions when somebody's applying for a position with the Broncos? And he said he's a huge Broncos fan, by the way. So
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Go Broncos. Hopefully we beat the Bills tomorrow. I think my advice for a resume is really to just cater it to the position that you're applying for. So I think oftentimes, and I was even this way of, I had a variety of different experience in college and I wanted to showcase that on a resume. But if you're applying for a social media job, maybe I don't need to include all of the stuff I did as the executive producer of a newscast. And that's something you could bring up in an interview to just show that you have a greater background, but it can sometimes get jumbled if there's too much on your resume. And so I think to stand out is to really cater it to the job that you're applying for and then be specific. And that can be hard, but it's like I took over the USC Instagram, and since that I was running it, it increased 15% in terms of the followers. And so I think that having that data is really key. And then in the interest section, I would say if there's something unique about that, include that, because it only becomes a conversation starter. And so you see a lot of people who, I worked for the yearbook, I worked for the newspaper, and that kind of becomes repetitive. But I didn't know that you were a black belt karate star. And that's completely random and kind of goes against my thing of tailoring it to the job. But I think that it's something unique that just makes you you. And so if there's a small way to include that kind of in the interest section, it makes you stand out.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice as far as trying to make your resume stand out. And a good follow-up to that, that we had actually prepared to ask you is, how would you advise students to use their own social media accounts to kind of create a brand for themselves, to market themselves as they're trying to get into the job market? You work in social media, you're the expert. How do we use social media to brand ourselves?
I think it's really important. And the fact that this generation of college students grew up with social media makes you all probably stand out more or have more knowledge than I necessarily did when I was coming through. And so I think that that's really important. I will share that the first thing we do when I'm going through applicants after looking at resumes is I'll go look at your social media and try to find you. So it's concerning if I can't find your social media account just because you want to have someone who is active on the platform. So I think it's really key to have a presence. And then I'll share a story about when we were applying for a job. We didn't end up hiring this person, but I went to her social media and I could not stop laughing for about 30 minutes and just scrolled through her Twitter and thought that she had the funniest sports takes and reactions. And it was so great. And like that really stood out to me. And so I think if you kind of invest in the culture and invest in what sports is or what the SM sports community on Twitter is, I think it shows that you have an understanding about how social works and how sports social works. And so my advice would be to really lean into that, but also be aware that your social media platforms can be your resume. And so be cognizant of what you're putting out there to make sure that it couldn't come back to hurt you in the future.
That's great. We got another question from Facebook, and it says, how do you work to support other departments? You know, you're not just working always to promote what's going on the field. How do you work with the other departments? You know, and it specifically said, you know, something like community development.
I think it's one of my favorite parts of the job, just because I think with my role in social, I work with almost every department within the Broncos organization. So you get to have a hand or say in so many different things. And what I really try to do is meet with each department and figure out, hey, if this is a community event that we really want to promote, if we can start a month in advance, then I'm going to work with them as much as possible to figure out the best way to promote it. And I think that we've established kind of a relationship with all the different departments that they can trust us to be the quote unquote experts in our field. So if sponsorship wants to put something out on social, I really value and appreciate that they'll come to me and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then we work together to figure out, okay, here's what our standards are on social media, and here's what we need to do to please the partner, and work together to really do that. And it's the same thing with community in terms of promoting their events and what the guys are doing. It's how can we shed this in the best light and really work with them hand in hand.
That's really, really cool. You know, we got another question. I love these Facebook questions we've been getting. So this is kind of a unique question. Is it easier or harder to get a job when you're looking to work for a specific team?
I would say it's harder, just because you never know when there's going to be an opportunity available. And so if you broaden your horizon to, like I was mentioning, not being afraid of an internship, I also was applying for like minor league baseball jobs, or like, don't be afraid of the level of professional team that it is or where it is. I had never been to Denver before when I took the internship and thought I was just going to be there for a year. Now here I am on my 5th year. So you really never know what can happen. And I think that it's good to get the experience elsewhere. Like when I didn't know that I was going to get hired on full time, I received advice like, hey, if there's not a full-time position open, like you should be applying for internships with other NFL teams if you know that you want to work there, and do this again for another year, because you get the perspective of how a different organization approaches it, and it only is going to broaden your experience and your knowledge.
That's awesome to hear that the Broncos, you know, are the type of organization that they were trying to develop you, you know, to set you up beyond just your year-long internship and kind of what you could give them. They valued you and what your career would be, and ultimately they kept you on. So that's really cool. You mentioned how you weren't afraid to even look at and apply for minor league baseball. And you mentioned earlier how the first thing you do is you look at people's social media. And I told you, we did some research. And in that research, you know, based on your Twitter, you seem to be more of a baseball fan, but you work in football. So is that a fun challenge, or does it make work feel like work for you?
So I'm from Atlanta, to give that perspective. And so growing up, I lived through the 14 straight division titles that the Braves won. And it really was a part of my life. I played softball, so I felt like I had a connection to the game in that sense. And that was our team and the team that we rooted for, and I still root for to this day. I think why it might be more of a presence on my social media than others is that I feel like it's the one thing I can still root for, like that and USC football. So it's a way for me to still be a fan, which I don't necessarily think I can do in the professional capacity of working for the Broncos in an NFL team. And so it's my way to still kind of keep that passion and that you see from all fans. So it's a fun side project for me, I guess, to root for the Braves and USC football.
Very cool. So we got another question from Facebook. It says, I'm not a college freshman, the person on Facebook. I'm a college freshman. I've been trying to figure out, is it too early to start looking for internships? Should I wait till after my sophomore year? Like, when would you advise people to start looking to get internships?
It's definitely not too early. And I think the hardest part, and I remember being in your shoes and I was applying for internships, but the only experience I had on my resume as a freshman in college was like the campus store job that I worked. And I was like, that's not going to give me a job in sports. Or I started working for the media center at USC. And so I could put that, but it's hard to get that. Your first internship might not be your favorite internship. I think this kind of goes back to your point about networking. I was probably a little scared maybe as a freshman to talk about what I was most passionate about, especially depending on who the person was. And it was hard for me because I knew so deeply in my soul that I wanted to work in sports and was so passionate about it. And I ended up getting the internship that I had with USC my sophomore year. And it was because of a conversation that I had with a girl that I knew. And I didn't know that she worked for the athletic department and she made the introduction for me. But I think I was apprehensive to share what I was so passionate about it, partly because I was so passionate about it that I didn't want someone to knock me down or tell me that I couldn't do it. But then I also didn't think that people would care. They thought it was weird how interested I was in sports. And so I share that to say, don't be afraid to have those conversations or reach out to people on LinkedIn and really network, because you never know who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone that can get your foot in the door. And so I think if you really are passionate about it, to not be afraid to really voice that and share your interests.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. Definitely great advice. So the next question, it's kind of a two sided sword or whatever, two-headed monster. It's what's the best career decision that you've made to this point, and then what's the worst career decision that you look back and you're like, I probably could have done that better than I did.
I'll probably start with the worst one, if that's okay. I think that one's
Yeah.
probably easier to answer. We've talked a lot about the fact that I started with the Broncos as an intern, and I was coming off 3 years of working for the USC athletic department and had just an amazing boss and coworkers there, and was so confident coming out of college because I thought that I had experience that no one else could get, and that we were just making awesome content and had the best approach to social. And before my interviews with the Broncos, I was looking at their social media platforms and I was like, oh, I have so many ideas for how I can make this better. And I can't believe they do that. We do this, and was just really naive more than anything. And so when I came in as an intern, I really struggled my first month or so to learn how the Broncos approach social media, because I was so quick with wanting to share all my suggestions or thinking of ways in which we can improve it that I didn't necessarily take the time to learn why they made the decisions that they did or why they took the approach that they did. And so I think that that's a valuable lesson for me, and something that I share with a lot of students that I work with is even if you're just going to a new job, I think there are a lot of things that you have to figure out. Okay, why do they make the decisions that they do? Or why do they do it this way? Because especially in social, everyone has a different approach or thought process on something. And so that was a really tough transition for me to go from working for USC to learning how the Broncos did things. But I was kind of grateful that I struggled at the beginning, because it taught me a valuable lesson, and I kind of took a step back and really learned the why behind everything before kind of jumping in with suggestions or thinking that we should be doing it differently. The best career decision I made was probably taking the internship. I know that that's probably a cliche answer, but I never in a million years thought that I would get hired on full time after that. Nor did I think that I would be the sole person running the Broncos account and really have the growth that I've seen over the last few years, especially this quickly for me. And so I think that I didn't know it at the time, but that's probably the best career decision that I've made.
Yeah, those are both great. It's funny that taking the internship is the best. And then the lessons you learned in that first month, and how excited you were, kind of, you're like, oh, I should have done that differently maybe. And been more of a learner, I guess, from the get-go. And you got to find that balance though, because you don't want to just sit back and not offer your ideas,
Of
so it's
course.
got to be difficult.
I think the thing that I learned too was just that there's not one way to do things. So if you can sit there and learn the reasons why and really understand that, and I still try to carry that out in our day-to-day stuff of explaining and like having a strategy and a reason why, so that way not just our social group can understand our approach to something, but we can share that with our sponsorship team of like, hey, we're doing this because this is what we've learned, and then on top of that, here's the data to prove it, and really kind of being able to showcase that. So it was a big learning experience for me, and it was something I struggled with too. And I think a lot of people that are students that are listening to this probably can relate. I think especially the type of person that works in sports are usually a really driven person and motivated, and you have all these internships, and you've seemingly been quote unquote successful. And so it was hard for me because I thought that I never really encountered something that I had failed at before, because I was working. And I mean, I definitely failed at things. I'm not saying that, but I just think that I had never really struggled with a task that someone had given me. And so it was a good learning experience to go through it, and only made me stronger.
Yeah. Wow. That was good. That was really good. So we got another question though from Facebook, and it says, how do you decide when to post? And then are there certain guidelines put, on you from the organization that you have to follow, or even the league that puts on you? So how do you decide when to post? And then are there any guidelines that you're following?
Definitely. So we have a kind of a schedule on all of our different platforms, or at least Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that we try to have a daily posting schedule. Facebook, because of its algorithm, we try to space things out by at least an hour. And if it's a slower day where we don't have as much content, even more, because its algorithm will restrict how many people see that piece of content if you're posting it back to back. So we mainly do that so that way we hit the most reach possible. Now, our content schedule kind of goes out the window on a game day, just because things are moving quickly and there's a broader audience that's paying attention to you on that day. But for the most part on Facebook, we try to space things out by at least an hour, and then Twitter is usually 30 to 45 minutes. Instagram is one. On a non-game day, we just try to post at least 3 to 4 times a day in season, and we'll dial that back in the off season, but usually space those out by at least 3 hours or so, to kind of, again, to make sure that since it's not chronological anymore, we're still reaching the most audience that we can for each post. And I forgot the second part of that question. Sorry.
No, it was just, are there any guidelines that you have to follow? And then, how do you decide when to post? So I think you kind of touched on it anyway in your answer. So we got another question, and then I think we'll get close to wrapping up because I'll have one more for you. But what was the best performing tweet that you ever had working with the Broncos? Is there like that one that you've got framed that we can't see right now on camera because you're so proud of the way that it performed and was successful?
There's definitely been a few. I'll start with a couple this season, just because I think, like I mentioned, the 2020 Can You Not? What I liked about that one is we had some of our partners send it to us like, hey, this was a really funny tweet. And so it was nice to see that it kind of reached that many people. The Kendall Hinton story that I mentioned, I thought that we handled it in a way and got some really positive feedback on kind of the approach that we took there. But the all-time best performing tweet that we've put out was Peyton Manning congratulating Drew Brees on passing his record. And I just sat there on my phone and watched the retweets go. And me, retweets are my love language. They make me very happy. I love when a post performs really well. So that one had over like 13,000 retweets and over 1 million views. And that one was a special one that I'll always remember.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. And, probably 2 future Hall of Famers. Like we said, we don't vote, but maybe that helps a little bit on your tweets. You should get more Hall of Famers involved, or future Hall of Famers.
There you go.
So as we get close to wrapping up, I actually have 2 questions for you. The first question would be, if there's a student that's been watching, or young professional, seasoned vet, anybody that wanted to get a hold of you, to connect with you, to network with you, what advice or how would you tell them to do that?
Definitely follow me on Twitter or DM me. My handle is cmdeisley14. Feel free to reach out that way. I'm on Twitter a lot, so I think that's an easy way to get a hold of me. Also feel free to find me on LinkedIn and connect there. I think that's a place that when I'm catching up on things, I go to first and go through messages a lot. So that's probably the best way to reach me, especially if you have several questions that I can give more in-depth answers to. So it's the best way to reach out to me.
Yeah, and just for all of our viewers, we did post that. It's kind of pinned there as the top comment on the video today, both the LinkedIn account and Twitter handle. So connect with her, let her hear from you, let her know that you watched and were a part of the program today. And then the last question I have for you, and hopefully this kind of can wrap things up and put a nice little bow on it. It's the Christmas season, what is that one piece of advice that you want to leave with everybody today? And it can range from high school up to the seasoned veterans. Like, what's that piece of advice that stuck with you and now you want to leave with all of us?
I think something that's really important is we talked about it earlier, but to figure out what it is that you're passionate about, because that was stressed with me from a really young age. And I think that I still am kind of have these pinch me moments where I can't believe I'm doing what I am doing because I had dreamt of it for so long. And so I think that's key, is to just figure out what you're passionate about. But then at the same time, I got some really valuable advice from my former boss at USC, and it was also find something that you're passionate about outside of your job. So you can be really passionate about your job, and I'm so probably too passionate about my job sometimes, but there's always going to be aspects of a job that are going to bother you or cause you stress or anxiety. And it's just the nature of the fact that it is work and that it is a job. And so if you're able to really find something that you can escape from your job or your day-to-day responsibilities that you're really passionate about and interested, I think it helps you find that work-life balance. So being able to identify those two things and find a way to separate them, I think is really important.
Wow, that was really good advice. Because when you're talking about being passionate about what you do, I was like, yeah, I've heard that before. But then find something outside of your work even that you're passionate about. Like, I'm gonna take that to heart. That's advice for me today too. So thanks for that advice, Caroline, and hopefully you guys as our viewers appreciated that as well. And with that, we're gonna conclude this installment of our Before the Snap series with Caroline, the social media engagement manager for the Denver Broncos. And we thank you guys all so much for joining us. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you're a high school student, college, a professor, a teacher, a young professional, a seasoned veteran, or just a fan of the Denver Broncos or a football fan in general. Thank you for taking time to view the program today and watch it with us. Please, like, subscribe, follow the Hall of Fame on all of the social media platforms. I'll plug the Denver Broncos platforms because we have Caroline with us today. I'm sure it's easy enough to find. Just search Denver Broncos. You guys can follow them as well. Here in the Hall of Fame, we've got other great content like our podcast hosted by Jameer Howerton, the Mission Podcast, our Heart of a Hall of Famer series powered by Extreme Networks, where we've got Gold Jackets talking about the lessons that the game of football taught them. But thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us. And we look forward to continuing this Before the Snap program going into 2021. And we actually have a Denver Bronco that'll kick it off. Scott Lantis, the marketing manager, will join us on Friday, January 8th at 12 o'clock Eastern to be a part of the program. So once again, thank you, Caroline, and thank you everyone for viewing. And we hope you have a great holiday season.